All right. I'm Viveka Morris. I'm the executive director of a new program at Yale Law School called the Law, Ethics, and Animals Program, or LEAP, which is a multidisciplinary program focused on industrialized animal cruelty and its impacts on animals, people, and the environment. I'm going to first briefly introduce the topic of this panel, which is high-speed line speed, and then introduce these four terrific panelists who are all doing really important work on this topic. And as just a reminder, they're each going to speak very briefly to introduce themselves and their work, and then we're going to turn it over to questions. So please do send in your questions. For years, as we heard about earlier today already, the pork and poultry industries have been pushing the USDA to quote-unquote modernize pork and poultry slaughtering lines and food safety inspection systems. But as our own Amanda Hitt has pointed out many times, modernization in this case is too often a euphemism for privatization and deregulation. HIMP is the acronym for the USDA's pilot program in both high-speed poultry and pork inspection and slaughter. And in a nutshell, what the HIMP program does is it allows processing line speeds to go faster and faster and decreases the role of federal inspectors, shifting the responsibility for inspection from the government to the plant itself. And so today we're going to talk about this in three different animal systems: poultry, pork, and we might also touch briefly on beef. High-speed poultry slaughter is already widely underway in the U.S., with speeds set to go as high in some plants as 175 birds per minute. That means that inspectors have about 1/3 of a second per bird to inspect a chicken carcass. And as some perspective, in the early 1970s, the average speed was around 23 birds per minute, so it's a really extraordinary increase. High-speed pork slaughter is about to go underway, starting next month in December. A final rule from the USDA paving the way for this increase was published in October of this year. Under this new swine slaughter inspection service, or NSIS, which is effectively the continuation and expansion of the HIMP program, there will be no speed limit at all on how fast hogs can be slaughtered. Which is really saying something, because the prior line speed limit was 1,106 hogs per hour. But now we have plants like the quality pork producing plant in Austin, Minnesota, the QPP, that are known to be running at 1,300 hogs per hour. And that means that it's about 3 seconds per hog for inspection, and it's expected that about 90% of the pork produced in the US is going to be produced at these speeds. And then finally, we have beef. This has not yet been rolled out in beef, but is being teed up for beef next. So stay tuned for that. From the industry's perspective, of course, faster line speeds mean higher profits by going through animals more quickly and going through more animals, and by using less labor. But one thing we're hoping to drive home with this panel is that these are not cost saving if you look at this holistically. This is profit producing for the plants, in that on average the USDA expects that these big pork plants, for instance, will increase their profits by $2 to $3 million annually. But the costs of this are really severe. They're just not being paid by the plants. They're being paid by workers. They're being paid by animals. They're being paid by consumers who are facing potentially life-threatening food, and they're being paid by the environment, which the USDA did not consider the amplified effects of pollution coming from these slaughterhouses when they passed this. And then for all these issues, whistleblowers have been absolutely key in illuminating both what's happening and in bringing these groups together, from animal welfare to workers to the unions and beyond, to try to address it. And so we're thrilled and really lucky to have one of those whistleblowers with us here today, Phyllis McKelvey. Phyllis is a retired USDA FSIS inspector with 44 years of experience in the poultry industry, including many years in HIMP facilities. She knows firsthand the impacts that HIMP has on workers and on food safety, and she's going to kick us off by speaking for about 10 minutes or less about what she saw as an inspector and what she's hearing from current high-speed poultry inspectors. Shannon Devine is with Public Citizen, where she's working on line speed issues as well to try to protect workers' health and safety. She's also extremely knowledgeable and works to defend whistleblowers, and will also be able to speak to whistleblowing, retaliation, and risks. Rachel Lyons is Deputy Legislative Director for the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, UFCW, which is the union for meatpacking workers in the US. Rachel can speak about the importance of labor in general, as well as the unionization in pork and poultry plants. And finally, we're lucky to have Margie Robinson, who is an attorney with the Humane Society of the United States. Margie can speak to, yes, exactly, can speak to how animal welfare is being impacted by line speed and how many of the USDA's claims about how this system is actually to the benefit of animals is hogwash. So to start us off, Phyllis, we're honored to have you on the panel. Will you tell us about what you saw firsthand?
If you have, I do speak a little bit low, so y'all may tell me how I'm doing.
This one.
This one?
Yeah, this one's better.
It's not sounding out good. Okay. I was an inspector for a number of years, and we were the first inspectors in a hemp plant in Gunnersville, Alabama. It started in the poultry plant in Gunnersville, Alabama first. We were running 91 birds a minute on a NELS program, which is the safest program that they came out with, that the companies had a lot of say-so in. But we went to hemp. And they didn't, the government, USDA, didn't even have a paper for us to record what we were doing on. We had to come up with things to do. Okay, then we were sitting on at the end of the lines, the inspectors, because the company called their people sorters, and they were looking at the product and doing what we did do, look at the visceral and the inside and outside of the bird and so forth. Okay, they come down to us at the end of the line. It's supposed to be finished product before it goes into the chill system. All right, we had less than 30 seconds to see a bird, but we could adjust our stands to where we could see. A good inspector sees their bird coming to them, they see the side of it, they see what they got to see inside, and they have a mirror that shows the front. As it goes away, they catch a glimpse of that side, because a lot of times during processing, fecal material gets on the wings and places, and you need to see the whole inside, outside of the product. Well, we were writing a lot of non-compliance reports because of fecal material and viscerals been left in the birds and so forth. Okay. These non-compliance reports is supposed to help either stop hemp or let it go. So district offices was stopping our non-compliance offices reports because they wanted Washington to see pretty, so they could pass this law nationwide to 175 birds a minute. Well, they sent a supervisor veterinarian out to the plants to position us on those lines, and we were not allowed to raise stands above seeing through the legs of the bird. Our eyes were supposed to be like the chickens are hanging on a shackle. This is the middle of the chicken. We were supposed to see that area only, not look down in or see anything that we could write a non-compliance report repeatedly on. So we had to do that. But a good inspector uses their sight, their smell, and you can still catch a lot of stuff, but you don't catch it all. There's no way any human being or a machine can catch everything that needs to be caught in 30 seconds or less. Okay, so I came to Washington. I was the secretary-treasurer of our local union. So I came to Washington with people for a march to try to get this 175 birds a minute stopped. So they told us at the union building, we'll do the talking, the big guys, and, you know, you guys just be prepared to march, okay? So I just took my sweet time getting off the bus. Guess what? They had 2 interviews for me. One was from Government Accountability, and the other one was from another newspaper reporter. So from what I found out in D.C. that day, I said, this is it. When I'm retired, I can speak for all these people. And I will speak out. And I have spoke out, let me tell you. I really have. I've had numerous and numerous phone calls and reporters in my home. I've had people from Germany, Argentina, England, Mexico, camera crews in my home because they don't want this, especially the European Union passed a chemical that they could use over there before. You couldn't ship product to them if it had even been sanitized with chlorine water. You had to use hot water. Plants are set up, they'd have a hot water places, nozzles, or chlorine water nozzles to turn on. So if they were running product to go overseas, it had to be a certain way, and even Canada. So they found out that the European Union had decided that they could use one of those chemicals in their process. And the people there in the countries do not want that. And as of last year, my picture was still being shown in Germany to stop that. A big impact, time for an old country girl sorting chickens in a chicken plant to begin with. But I said in the very beginning, if one word I say, 1 mile I drive, stops a baby from getting a nasty chicken nugget, or someone in a nursing home being fed gets unclean food, if I can stop that, it's worth every minute that I can put into this. So through the time, I'll tell you about the plants now, which I've been discussing with a lot of my ex-coworkers since I'm retired, but they're doing the job that I did do. You know, they passed the thing that, no, they wouldn't go 175 birds a minute nationwide. They was just going to throw it out there automatically. The plants were going to take over. So we did get that stopped. And they said you can run 140 birds a minute, proper equipment, and that you have to apply for that. Well, a lot of companies, Tyson's plants, Wayne Farms plants, a lot of Pilgrim's Pride, a lot of the plants were already running the 140 with the equipment. Okay. If you're running what the government says you can run, 140 birds a minute, with free federal inspectors. And get this, free federal inspection, 8 hours a day. Why would you want to take and put it all on your people to inspect those birds, hire more people and train them to do the work, give them their benefits, when you can get free labor? Unless there's something going wrong. You want to put trash out to the public. So most of the plants in Alabama now have put in this system. They're doing the 140 birds a minute, preparing to go to 175. If this 180, some of them are even dropping the visceral as soon as it comes out, what we call the draw machine. They're dropping it into the drain to go out. Proper inspection of that bird is the inspector must look at the visceral and the bird to see that there is no disease. If you pull that out, you're pulling out the liver, the spleen, and those two things show you whether that bird has leukosis or not. A leukosis bird is to be thrown away. Shows you a lot of times the lungs come out and there's some aerosaccolitis there that you can see in the lung cavity, but if you don't have that lung, you're not going to see it in the carcass. With that high speed of line, you're not going to see very much in that carcass anyway. If you're a sorter or a federal or whatever. But they're really doing some bad work and putting some bad product out. But USDA says they have to pass their Salmonella E. coli test for a year, no failures, before they can go to 175. Well, my thought on that is, and I'm pretty doggone sure, they're going to put as many chemicals in their water and like dropping that visceral in what veterinarian is letting them do that, I don't know the name of, or I would tell it. I tell you, I would tell it. Dropping that visceral is stopping the contaminant, because most of your draw machines are bringing it out without breaking the guts, and that's where your Salmonella and E. coli comes from. So that's the way they're trying to prevent it being on the product so they can pass their test. Always crooked ways to get things done. And I said in the very beginning, when they said they could go 180 without federal inspection and inspecting each carcass, they're up to something. And they are. And that's to flood the market. But you know what? I'm going to comment a couple of comments on some previous speaking today. The little Hispanic man that spoke about the cattle. Georgia and Alabama could not run a plant without the Hispanics or the immigrants. They could not. They've got signs up at every plant wanting to hire people. The American people, black and white people, won't work anymore in these plants. These little people are losing limbs. They're hurting themselves to make a living for their families because our people's more knowledgeable. They're not going to work under those conditions. And that will shut down what the government's allowed to do if the Hispanics will get together and not go to work for 3 days. There could be some changes made in this country. There could be some poultry industry changing immediately because those birds are in those houses waiting to come to be slaughtered. You got customers waiting to go out the back door with them. But if you stop work for 3 days, these plants can't run because they don't have any people to run them. Same way with growing poultry. If you farmers stick together and you have farmers associations, you're going to get what you want. I know this for a fact. When I went back to Gunnersville, Alabama to work, I was traveling. And when I went back there to work, the chickens were sick. The drains couldn't hold them. The men couldn't haul them out in the garbage cans fast enough. We were throwing away every bird that come down the lines. And this went on for months. Majority of the birds were sick. Well, the farmers got together because, if they can't get chickens through the lines, they're not making any money. You heard how much they get, and that's after process. Okay. Farmers got together in northern Alabama, and this when Gold Kist owned what is Pilgrim's Pride at this time, and they had a meeting from the people in Atlanta, which is corporate, the big office, and the farmers told them, said, listen, we're not growing any more chickens. You're giving us bad medication, we've got sick chickens, we're not growing any more chickens for you. Gold Kist head man said, what will it take? Get us some medicine, send us some well babies. And they looked at the man that was over the district and said, you're fired right now, get yourself off this property. He had been buying watered down medications and causing these farmers to lose their farms. So if you band together, we can get this country together. As far as the hogs, I used to live by a hog parlor. We had to eat supper before they washed down, or we couldn't eat supper. I can tell you that for the truth, because the smell would come up the hill. But anyway, if we band together in this country, we can do it. We can put clean food back on our tables. We wouldn't have to have meetings like this, because if we band together and do what's supposed to be done and make our officials do what's supposed to be done. Get back to whistleblowing. I lobbied a lot with Congress and the senators out here, and I brought my granddaughter and her husband up. I'd lobbied Congressman Ad Hoc 2 or 3 times, and I brought them up with me one trip. We went to Philadelphia to speak at the college up there, and they were with me. And I had made arrangements for them to get a private tour of the Capitol. So when we got to Congressman Ad Hoc's office that morning, Congressman Ad Hoc was standing at the door. He said, "Hey, Phyllis, what are you doing here today?" I said, "What about the kids at the Capitol?" He said, "Oh, but I got to talk to you." they were coming up on the vote on the 175 birds a minute. I told him face to face, sitting in one of the congressman's seats, him standing in front of me, I said, you work for the people of Alabama. You work for the land of Alabama and the water in Alabama. I said, do you not realize, besides hurting the people on the job, injuries, food they eat, you're hurting our land and our water if you pass this bill? Because the more chickens you grow, the more feces you have. The more feces you have, you're putting it on the land, and the more it's going out into our water. I said, we elected you to take care of Alabama. So we defeated this 175 at that time. We got to do it again. We got to band together.
I'll use this one. Hi, everyone. Can we give Phyllis another round of applause? You just absolutely embodied what it means to be a whistleblower. Your description that you came forward because you didn't want to see a child hurt by unsafe meat reminds me of what took place when I was just a kid. How many folks are familiar with the Jack in the Box killer hamburgers? Yep, right. And there were meat workers who had come forward to try to stop that from going out, and inspectors. And you know, it's unfortunately we're still dealing with this today, as we're seeing through the recent swine rule that was passed as well. In my experience working with whistleblowers over a decade now, whistleblowers are by far the most dedicated employees. And it takes so much courage to come forward. Just so much courage. You know, Phyllis was wise to wait until she was retired to do so, but it still was I'm sure it's still difficult in your position. She'd do it anyway, which is what most whistleblowers say. So can we just, before I go into some other comments, take a moment to also acknowledge all of the whistleblowers in the room today. If you don't mind standing, if you're comfortable doing so. Or you can sit. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so bear with me. I'm going to read a few notes because I'm not as polished a speaker as the others here today, but we'll get through this on time. So thank you so much for including me in the panel. And congratulations, FIC and Amanda in particular, on a decade of both empowering whistleblowers and protecting our food. A Public Citizen, the organization I work for, is a national consumer advocacy organization with more than 500,000 members and supporters. We advocate for an array of public interest areas, including worker health and safety and whistleblower protections. I'll be touching on the intersection of those two topics today within the context of line speeds. As Vivica had outlined in her opening, the increased line speeds within the pork and the poultry industry are modeled after the extremely contentious pilot program hemp that Phyllis also cautioned us about. According to national polling organized by the National Employment Law Project, this model, this approach is extremely unpopular with Americans across party lines. This is not a partisan issue. And they oppose the measure, rightfully so. We know through extensive documentation from whistleblowers, government agencies, and civil society alike that increased line speeds will result in increased worker health and safety threats and violations, as we've heard about, increased inhumane handling, and increased threats to consumers. This is a reality, and yet we're moving forward full speed ahead, no pun intended, with this plan. As my fellow panelist, Rachel, will likely touch on further, swine and poultry workers already face some of the highest workplace injury rates in the country. Increased line speeds put them in even greater risk of repetitive stress injuries, as well as the lacerations and amputations that Phyllis was speaking to. Their injury rates are particularly of concern, given that employers often underreport these injuries to disguise the full extent of the problem, and workers underreport due to fear of retaliation for doing so. You know, it's worth noting that Public Citizen has joined with the United Food and Commercial Workers to sue the USDA for finalizing the swine rule just in September, and we're waiting to hear a final decision, or excuse me, we're waiting to hear the government's response, which is due in early December. Rachel may speak to it further, but we're suing them on behalf of UFCW and 3 of its local unions, importantly. When public citizens submitted comments opposing the increase in line speeds within both the poultry and the swine industries, we repeatedly cited the whistleblower affidavits that GAP had organized through FIC, that I think were mentioned by Heidi in this morning's panel as well. As we know, as we've witnessed through Phyllis and her remarks, whistleblowers provide the most powerful firsthand accounts of what takes place on the line when you allow the fox to guard the hen house, which is happening here. But they also take grave professional and personal risks in the process, as we know. In some of the GAP affidavits, they detail the alarming food safety violations that we've heard about through Phyllis and others. Repeated concerns range from inadequate time to identify fecal matter diseases due to the fast line speeds, to plant employees' insufficient training when they were expected to identify these dangers, and the pressure that they received to turn a blind eye to contaminated meat and poultry. Similar to Phyllis's accounts, one USDA inspector reported, "I am concerned about the poultry products my children may eat if this program is implemented nationally." Occupational and food problems within the meatpacking industry are compounded by its pervasive culture of intimidation and silence, with a workforce that is largely treated as expendable. As we recently witnessed with the ICE raids of poultry workers in Alabama, and as we've heard throughout today, workers are disproportionately people of color and immigrants, and they face grave risks of termination or even threats of deportation for both reporting food safety concerns or if they become disabled on the job due to worker injuries. Unlike USDA inspectors, plant employees do not have viable legal channels to challenge retaliation. These factors lead to underreporting of both worker injuries and threats to consumers and animals. These findings are consistent with the 2016 GAO report that cautioned meat and poultry workers may underreport injuries and illnesses because they fear losing their jobs. Likewise, a survey by the Southern Poverty Law Center and the Alabama Appleseed Center documented the experience of more than 300 poultry plant workers in Alabama. 66% of workers surveyed were scared or reluctant to report injuries. And of those, 80% of the workers attributed their fear or their reluctance to report injuries to fear of retaliation. That fear extends to reporting food safety concerns. In their GAP affidavits, USDA inspectors recounted the daily pressures that plant workers face between job security and protecting consumers. As one USDA inspector had shared, quote, "It is my experience that plants are more concerned about production and the maintenance of the production line at high speeds. They are not stewards of the public interest, and their goals differ from that of the USDA. I have yet to see a plant properly train their employees in poultry sorting, and I have seen plant leadership fire those who bring food safety or quality assurance issues to their attention. The piloting of the hemp system was useful in that it made it very clear that plants do not care about consumers, and they should not be trusted to come up with their own inspection plans." End quote. The warning isn't any more clear than that, folks. Another USDA inspector, although USDA inspectors can challenge retaliation under the Whistleblower Protection Act, federal employees can do so. The primary federal whistleblower law enabled for them, the Whistleblower Protection Act. They also still take very significant risks when they come forward. Enforcing your rights can be extremely costly and time-consuming. The likelihood of prevailing is extremely low, although GAP has an unusually high success rate with its whistleblower cases. And the Merit Systems Protection Board, as we heard about this morning, the whistleblower's administrative form for their day in court is not even operational right now, and that's over a 2,000 case backlog. Given the dangers of coming forward for whistleblowers in the private sector or within government, GAP took measures to protect the whistleblowers' identities within their affidavits. And Phyllis, again, was wise to wait until she was retired to come forward. In closing, I do just want to highlight that the two greatest reasons whistleblowers or would-be whistleblowers don't come forward are one, a fear primarily, or the fear that their whistleblowing won't have an impact, and after that is the fear of retaliation. When their internal disclosures fall on deaf ears, that's often what leads them to come to organizations like FIC and GAP to share their disclosures. As advocates who rely heavily on whistleblowers, we have the responsibility to protect them in the process of benefiting from their knowledge. And we also need to know our own limitations. So I'd urge anyone considering blowing the whistle or working with whistleblowers to study GAP's whistleblower guides. I'm going to make a little plug for them right now. They're available on the front table. This one I'm holding before me, Working with Whistleblowers, a guide for public interest organizations, covers more than 40 years of lessons learned and best practices for how to safely work with whistleblowers so that we can help them to turn their information into power, as FIC does each day. Thanks so much.
I'm gonna see if I can use the Time Life mic, just because it makes me feel like I'm giving a TED Talk. All right, can you all hear me? All right, so here, let me tell you about my personal life story. No, I'm Rachel. I'm with United Food and Commercial Workers. We are the largest private sector union in the country, 1.3 million members. We're in every state and every congressional district. We're most well known as the grocery store union. So we represent, here in DC, we represent Safeway and Giant, Kroger's, Albertsons, Stop and Shop in the Northeast. So most likely your grocery store has some union workers in it. But what we're less well known for is the actual diversity of the number of industries that we are in, including meat packing. So this is a food conference. How many people have read The Jungle? All right. So in The Jungle, they feature the amalgamated butchers and meat cutters. That's us. So that is the union. We were formed as a combination between them and the retail clerks. And so that is, we have a history of representing meat processing and food processing workers. We represent about 200,000 folks along the line, including we have 71,000 folks in poultry, 30,000 folks in pork. We also represent beef and a little catfish. And then just to sort of round it out, we are in grocery, retail, pharmacy, healthcare, and to harken back to our farmers, we also represent the emerging cannabis industry. So there is growth there. And our members handle about 71% of the hogs slaughtered in the U.S. go before a UFCW member. We are part of, they are well trained, serve it part of your, an extra layer of protection for consumers, part of your food safety system. So when you increase line speeds, you endanger those people who are there as another extra set of eyes on the line. So we have all been talking about it, just to say it most plainly and clearer, increased line speeds hurts workers. I can't say it more clearly than that. It is just a danger up and down. It's already a tough job. And I know we've talked about it a lot, but it's kind of tough and it's kind of gross. Poultry workers are standing side by side, shoulder to shoulder, across a line from each other, making cuts, many cuts, time and time again. We're constantly in danger of neighbor cuts. The idea that your colleague is going to hurt you. It's cold. It's damp. You're being exposed to the same chemicals that your chickens are being exposed to. On the pork side, you have the speed addition to incredibly heavy animals, right? Both on pork and beef, really big. These carcasses fall onto people and hurt them. So as a result, poultry workers have twice the risk of being injured on the job as other industries. Think of this as manufacturing, practically. These are people on the line, and the speed and heaviness of all of this so all of the injury rates are compared to other, like auto workers, right? People working in mechanized industries. They suffer the illnesses at 7 times the rate. This is for poultry, and have the highest number of amputations of any industry. Meatpacking workers have, in addition, have the highest rate of musculoskeletal disorders. So those are sore shoulders, carpal tunnel, Lacerations, they're injured at 2 times the rate again, and they face illnesses at 17 times the rate. So it's tough. It's good, but if you have a union on your side, it's a little better. We're pretty heavily unionized in swine and beef, only 30% in poultry. So where you heard about your minimum wage workers before, our members make between $17 and $20 an hour, sometimes more in management. And what your union does for you in terms of safety, we negotiate benefits and wages. We represent you when you are hurt or when you come to DC to advocate for Congress. And when it doesn't go right, we litigate. And so that's what we were talking about with Public Citizen. We are suing the USDA over their attempt to hurt our workers. So, but we also do work with our employers to try to make things better. And so we train our stewards to know the health and safety regulations at their plants. Most recently, we signed a historic health and safety protocol with Tyson's. We only represent about, we're at 2,400 workers in Tyson's, only about 12 of the plants. And they keep increasing the line speeds in chicken, noticeably in non-union represented plants. Every time they come up, it's like, oh, that's interesting. Is this a UFCW plant? Nope, because they know that we would be there for our workers. So they are going around us. When we do work well with our employers, we've signed this historic agreement. And as a result, we've increased the number of inspections and the number of safety protocols. And the importance of doing it together is we're there telling the workers, but management is there telling the supervisors that these are the rules now. So though we do work with our employers to make things better, we train everybody, and then we do what I'm here in DC doing, which is lobby and advocate on behalf of our members. And we worked in this sort of great coalition with unlikely stakeholders. You don't always see the animal lobby and the slaughter lobby in the same room at the same table, but we were there fighting line speeds together. We tried to fight poultry. In fact, we won on poultry, and then they just going around us, so we won. They didn't increase the line speeds on poultry. Yay! Now they're issuing waivers to allow individual plants to increase the line speeds on poultry. Boo. It's just like, come on, follow the rules. So then they said, we're going to do this with swine. And we were like, all right, we're going to all form together. We're going to follow the rules. We submitted comments. We looked at the OSHA 300 logs, which are the logs that are the industry is required to keep and only submit if asked, right? And found tale after tale after tale of injury rates at those hemp plants. We represent 4 out of 6 of the hemp plants of increased injuries. And we said, look, it's just not working. You cannot ensure worker safety at higher speeds. Look, here's your own logs, show it. They didn't listen. We submitted comments. We asked them they didn't show the data. We asked them to reopen the docket, letter after, we played by the rules. It was all great. We submitted 6,000 postcards from our members who were like, we're the workers on the line. Don't raise the line speeds. And they were like, pfft. So we, so we were like, all right, there's got to be another way to do this. We worked with Congress and they submitted a letter to the USDA's Office of Inspector General and said, you know what, this sounds like this process hasn't gone right. And I don't love a good process ruling, but if it'll stop the line speeds, I'll take it. And so we worked with Congress to initiate an Office of Inspector General saying that they did not raise the line speeds. They didn't even write this rule properly. So that is going through right now. So an OIG report is being conducted. We also all work together to try to defund the whole thing through Congress, right? Let's see if we can just eliminate it. So Congress, the House of Representatives did pass an amendment. That's going to be stuck in appropriation. So God bless. I don't think we're going to get it all the way through. And so we pulled the last quiver out of our toolbox, arrow out of our backpack, whatever, and we're going to sue them, and we're doing it on behalf of the workers, the people who are in the plants, 3 of our members. And it's because they can't prove that they can increase these line speeds without hurting people or endangering our food. Like, there's just no evidence. It's not in the rule. They didn't prove it. And so we want to see if we want to make sure they can. So that's, the big consumer concern there, that increasing, we can work with our employers to make it safer. This isn't the way to do it. And so we really need to all work together to ensure that Congress, our members know that we're watching and this kind of thing doesn't happen in beef. So that's, and I'll answer questions.
Great. Thank you.
See if you have options.
Can you guys hear me? No? Oh, now you can. Okay.
Really close.
My name is Margie Robinson. I'm with the Humane Society of the United States, and I just want to thank FIC for having me, and thank you, FIC and Amanda, for all the great work that you do. So the Humane Society of the United States is the country's largest animal protection organization, and we fight to protect all animals, including farm animals. And our Farm Animal Protection Campaign, and Chris Holbein, one of our leaders of that campaign, is here today, works to raise awareness about and combat the animal welfare, environmental, and social problems that come with industrialized animal agriculture, including the industrialized slaughter of animals. And I work in HSUS's litigation department, the Animal Protection Litigation Department, specifically supporting that farm animal campaign through legal advocacy, including submitting comments on regulatory actions. And then we also have staff at our affiliate, Humane Society Legislative Fund. Another member of our team is here today, Elizabeth Smith, and they interface with legislators and federal agencies to advocate for policies to reduce animal suffering and also the environmental consequences of factory farming. So just before I sort of jump in to speak more specifically about the impacts that increased line speeds have on animal welfare, I want to give you a little context about how animals are killed in these facilities, specifically chickens and pigs. They're killed on assembly lines, and the bottom line, as you can gather, I think, from the rest of the conversation, is killing as many animals as quickly as possible. There's not a focus on worker safety, there's not a focus on food safety, there's not a focus on minimizing animal suffering. And the animals, both pigs and chickens, are supposed to be stunned before they're processed, before they're killed and processed in these facilities. In chickens, they're actually hung on the line while they're still conscious and then stunned. In pigs, they're stunned first and then hung on the line. But there's a lot of problems with the stunning systems in slaughterhouses currently, and this causes major problems because if animals aren't initially stunned when they should be, or if they're stunned and they return to consciousness, then that means they're conscious as they're being processed on the line. And so for chickens, it means they can be conscious when their neck is cut by this automated blade that slits their throat. They can be conscious as they're bleeding out from that cut. It also means that they might miss that blade and they might not die when they go into a scald vat, which is a vat of scalding water. So they actually die from either drowning or from being in that very hot water. With pigs, if they're not properly stunned, or if they return to consciousness after stunning, then they can actually, again, be conscious as they're shackled. They can be conscious as they're cut by, or they're stuck by a knife as they're bleeding out, or potentially when they enter the scald vat, which is to loosen the hair, which is supposed to happen when they're dead. So it's supposed to be loosening the hair from the carcass. So we already know that there are a lot of these problems already in slaughterhouses from both USDA's own non-compliance reports, violations of regulations that they've documented, but also from work with animal protection groups who have gone into these facilities and done investigations and documented these major problems. And increasing the line speeds is just going to make these problems worse. before the animals are actually stunned. In the context of chickens, as workers are trying to hang these live birds on the line and they have to move more quickly, it's going to be harder for the workers to do that, and the birds are likely going to get handled more roughly just because the workers have got to keep up with the line. And then for pigs, they're sort of moved through some chutes as they are moved to the stunning process, and workers might have to engage in abusive tactics just to keep the animals moving because the workers are being forced to keep up with the lines, and that includes things like electrically prodding the animals. And then also, as the lines move more quickly, it increases the risks that animals aren't going to get properly stunned, meaning that they're going to be conscious for the rest of the process, and that, of course, has the animal suffering and welfare issues that I mentioned earlier. And I'm a lawyer, so I'm going to talk a little about the legal problems here, but there are legal issues with both of these things, both in the context of pigs and chickens. So although the U.S. Department of Agriculture doesn't view chickens as being protected under the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act, USDA has recognized that there's this connection between the humane handling of chickens at slaughter and the increased risk that the food will be dangerous for consumers under the Poultry Products Inspection Act, which is what allows federal inspectors to inspect the meat that we produce in this country. And then in the context of pigs, the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act does explicitly protect pigs and requires that they have to be rendered insensible to pain before being shackled, hoisted, thrown, cast, or cut. So if they're awake during this process, then that's a violation of that act. And as Rachel in particular noted, there's been a lot of broad support across different public interest groups in opposing these line speed increases. The food safety groups, the animal welfare groups, of which Humane Society of the United States is just one. There's many other groups that have been involved in this work. So we've all submitted comments opposing these increases. And in the context of the Humane Society of the United States, the Office of the Inspector General report is limited to looking at problems with worker safety data, and we've asked a couple of members of Congress, we helped them draft a letter to ask to expand that to include problems with the animal welfare data that the agency was looking at as well. And then, of course, as Rachel mentioned, we've supported legislation that would defund the program, at least until the Office of the Inspector General issues its report. So, we are, I think, I in particular am very grateful that there is such a broad and supportive coalition that's really working to fight these issues.
Great, thank you all. We have a question coming in about a strategy, an alternative to litigation, which is collective bargaining. And so, Rachel, has UFCW attempted to collectively bargain over line speeds?
So it's interesting to note the way how they are able to increase line. So line speeds are governed by the Food Safety Inspection Service, by the number of inspectors on the line, right? So the way they have increased line speeds is by transferring that work to our members without any money or training to learn the job that was previously done by a federal government employee with years of training. So there isn't so that's just a sort of thing to note in there that is how they're able to do it. So they're not, they're going at workers in two directions, right? Which is always have in our contracts negotiated. So in most of our plants, our stewards stop the line. And the other person who can stop it is management or the inspector. So those are the three people who can stop the line. In a non-union plant, that they might do it because someone is injured, but they won't have the protection. The meat packing is really hard to organize. They are consolidating their, as we've been talking about all day, the industry. The last biggest campaign in North talking about. One of them, it took 12 years. They fired all the organizers, jailed a bunch of the organizers, on-campus jail, so that they didn't even send them off to local, so they didn't go into the system. So it's tough. But yes, the short answer is yes, you can, and we do put line speeds.
Phyllis, you spoke about some of the food safety concerns that you've seen firsthand in the plants. Have workers come to talk to you as well, or spoken with you about their injuries? Have you witnessed that?
I'm sorry. Yes, I certainly have. While checking a vat of pre-chickens that had been reprocessed, one of the little girls was there, a little Hispanic girl was there, and she was putting her gloves on, and she had a knot, looked like a big hen egg, up on her wrist. And I said, "Do you go to the nurse?" And she didn't understand me, and so I got a guy that I knew that would translate, and she said, "No, she's too afraid." So I went and got to the supervisor, which I'm a federal employee, not supposed to do this. But I went and got the supervisor over her line, and I said, "You're going to have a child lose her wrist." And this child must have been about 14 years old. They buy papers, and they get jobs. So she was just a baby. I said, "She's going to lose her hand if you don't get her some help." He got her off the line, took her to the nurse. They got her medication, put splints on her hand, and let her use her hand for a long time. When that happened, they all found out I could get something done. So I had a number of babies to have to send to the nurse. I said, "If you go to the nurse, she'll protect you. She won't let you come back out if you're hurt. She'll tell your supervisor. She'll protect you." And that got their confidence of going to the plant nurse. And all the plants, they've got somebody they learned that will help them, and that's, because there's injuries. I mean, every day there's major injuries. One time I was walking through the plant to go check some product, and a lady's cutting guard got caught where she was hanging a piece of chicken up on a shackle. Her steel cutting guard got caught on that steel shackle, and it was pulling her. I got her by the legs while this person ran and shut the line off. She was above the surface. I had to hold her up till they could get her on. Someone stronger could get her off the shackle. In a plant in Albertville, Alabama, which is a Tyson's plant now. It was McElrath at that time. And this lady just recently passed, is what brought it to my memory. People back years ago cared. The employees cared if it was a clean plant, if it was a clean job. The company employees were just good old home folks, they cared about their jobs. And she saw a chicken that bypassed the trip off to go into the chiller, and she hadn't taken her guard off yet. And she reached up and to get that chicken, and the next shackle got her, pulled her hand off. They flew her to Birmingham, and fortunately, through a number of surgeries, she got to keep her hand. But it pulled her hand completely off. So that's the kind of equipment you're working with. Another point, with this 175 birds a minute, they're running all those birds with a lot less employees. When they started out in Gunnersville, you had a final trimmer that was to get any bruises or if they saw contaminants on the bird to trim it off and so forth. Well, it went well for about 6 months like that. They put a mirror up and took one of those trimmers away. They had a person to present the bird to their person that was inspecting it, the company inspector. In about the same amount of time, they took that person down. So no matter what condition that chicken is, it comes to their sorter, or they call them sorters. They've got to take care of it. They've got no one to get it to where they can see what's going on. But let them stop that line, they're in trouble. So that's what we're dealing with today. Less employees and faster line speed and more product.
In addition to less employees per slaughter plant, we also have just flat out less slaughter plants, and that there's been massive consolidation of slaughterhouses in the United States since about the 1960s. So rather than having a network of small slaughterhouses, we have these mega, enormous slaughterhouses that are running at these incredibly high speeds. And one of the questions that came into this point, and a curious side fact about this is that the etymology of the word abattoir actually means to tear down, which is exactly what's been happening in the United States. But we have a question that came in, which is antitrust enforcement an important part of the solution, for that matter? Is part of the reason why this high line speed is being implemented because we have these massive slaughterhouses? And perhaps, Margie, you could speak too to whether would animals be better off, and would all these other constituency groups be better off with a more dispersed network of smaller slaughterhouses?
You know, I don't think that I can speak to the antitrust issues. That's certainly not my area of expertise. I think if there were smaller slaughterhouses and the workers and the equipment functioned in such a way that the animals would be better treated, then certainly there could be benefits. I think it just depends on, you know, if these smaller slaughterhouses are still running at very high speeds, there's still going to be the problems that we're dealing with. But I do certainly think, you know, from a perspective of organizations having consolidated their power, I mean, certainly that's going to make it more difficult to address these issues.
Yes. I think that some antitrust efforts would. Senator Booker has a agriculture moratorium. Like let's not stop it entirely, but let's hold our role and see what it is. We would also like to see these mergers respect the existing collective bargaining agreements. What they're making, you know, so you take over a plant that already has a union in it, and they make them go back to the table and sign new cards and reunionize a whole plant, therefore losing the protections and that all those people have. So we would like some built-in protections in these consolidations for the workers as they go forward.
Well, terrific. We're out of time, but thank you all so much. Oh, yes.
Of the plan, yeah. I think the AMI was 1 year. So the Meat Institute was, 1 year of data. So I would like to see, so most of the statistics we're talking about are over 10 and 15 multi-year pieces of data. So it remains to be seen, is it? I saw that report, and yes, there is some evidence. But our concern is that it's not that the injuries have gone down, but that the reporting has gone down.
Yeah. I'll just also add, in the USDA's proposed swine rule, it had claimed that under the hemp program there were fewer injuries for workers. And the National Employment Law Project and another organization had FOIA'd the documentation for that data, and working with researchers at the university conducted an analysis that debunked that position, demonstrating there was no factual basis for that assertion. And in the final rule, the USDA kind of remained silent on worker safety, saying they didn't have jurisdiction to address worker safety, which were challenging in the lawsuit. So thanks for raising that.
I mean, every time you ask them about worker safety, they go, "It's not my job." And the people who are involved in that, you're turning over the inspection duties, it's somehow not their job to ensure that their safety of their work or the safety of the animals, even though that is technically their job.
Right. So at the end of the day, who are you going to believe? The meat industry or the workers on the line witnessing what's going on and experiencing the impacts? The workers, obviously.
And this is an exciting issue, I think, too, just as the final panel of today's conference, because it really demonstrates, too, that both the importance of recognizing that these issues of animal welfare, worker rights, whistleblower protection, environmental protection are not distinct issues, that they're completely intertwined and one and the same, and the importance of these groups coming together, and the importance of people like Amanda Hitt and groups like Government Accountability Project that recognize that and that make that their mission, and that not only are fighting these issues firsthand, but are building coalitions like today to that end. So thank you, and another round of applause for FIC.